Start. Okay, let's talk about something just a little bit before we get on. Now, I was reviewing the Phaedo. I think it's about right. That's one of the Socratic dialogues, and what was always curious to me is Phaedo is really interesting because Phaedo is the argument where Socrates has an argument basically with some of the priests, the Athenian priests, and basically we believe this is one of the things that led up to him being put to death, basically, being tried and executed for not heresy, heresy for atheistic viewpoints or heresy, which is the apology. Because in the Phaedo, he really irritates some of the priests in the Athenian priesthood, and we believe he had a negative, kind of an on and off relationship that was kind of negative with them. But what's really interesting about Phaedo that confused me when I first read it, and as a youth, long time ago, is in it is a very articulate, constructed argument that the gods don't need anything from us. And that was one of the biggest, it wasn't that the priests were arguing the gods needed anything. In fact, you need to read the Phaedo if you haven't, but rather the sophistication of the argument. Because let's look at this just a little bit, since one of the big focuses right now in Hebrews that we're looking at in the 9th chapter is about sacrifice. That's the big deal, is sacrifice. And we have this attitude about sacrifice, and I think it's very wrong because, well, what's our viewpoint of sacrifice by ancient peoples?
Illogical.
Yeah, illogical, silly, barbaric. Yeah, why would you do that, right? Why would you need to do that? What's the purpose? And yet, I would argue with you that that is not their view. And I would also argue with you that because our education system has come the way it has, remember, the biggest problem I think with our education system is they stopped teaching the legal historical method back about 100 years ago, back at the turn of the 20th century. And that has led us down a road that has been very bad. But when they did that, they stopped teaching kids Greek and Latin and all these really cool things they needed to know, especially the Bible, right? The Greek, especially Greek and Latin, because with the Greek you can read the original scriptures. With the Latin you can see what the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church did, right? And you can understand their philosophy and their ideas and their theology. So by cutting the world off from these things, we have been left with an attitude or viewpoint that I think is a caricature of the true view. Let's look. Remember, when I draw this all the time, I say, okay, they started with animism, and they went to pantheonic paganism, and then they went to mysterion, and then they went to Gnosticism. This is the evolution we see in religion. Animism. Let's think about it. If you're an animist, why are you sacrificing? Maybe I should prep that a little bit. Okay, so if you're an animist, that means that the apple tree that sits in your front yard has what in it?
God.
There is a God. They would call it a God, pure God, right? But it's a dryad or a naiad, or it is a God of that tree. So why do you sacrifice to the God of that tree?
Please, to give you lots of apples. Yeah, to get something.
In a pure animistic standpoint, I take an apple from the tree. Now, even if it wasn't my tree, if it's just an apple that I find hanging out in the fruit, when I pick the apple, why am I sacrificing to the tree?
It's Thanksgiving. Thank you for giving you.
It's Thanksgiving. I am in an animistic viewed world. The reason I do it, okay, in an animistic view world, okay, I shouldn't have said it's your tree. I should have said it's just a tree, right?
Somewhere in the forest.
somewhere in the forest, I pick the fruit. The reason I do it is so that Dryad or Naiad, the god of that tree, is not displeased. So I am giving it as thanksgiving, right, to the tree. I'm not doing it because I want something in the future or something particular from the tree other than the apple, right? So that is a direct relationship. Now, in animism, why am I doing a sacrificial ceremony, a sacrifice of an animal in animism?
Well, it does seem strange because if everything has a god in it, you're sacrificing one god to another god.
There's a life force in the animal, right? And when you kill the animal and you release that life force, now it's interesting. Did the Greeks believe that there were gods in animals?
I don't think so.
Buddhists
Not they were pagan.
No.
Pantheonic pagan.
Buddhists might.
They didn't believe there were gods in people either, right? They believed there was if you like, right? There's the nephesh. There is the breath of God that animates the animal, but there is no God in the animal. If I were to kill an animal, there's a God in the animal, that would be like huge sacrilege, right? That'd be horrible. But the fact of spilling of blood, of taking the nephesh, the breath of life from the animal, and killing it, therefore I am placating the gods, right? It's the same as taking the apple. I'm playing the god. Well, for example, who was the god of pigs, according to the Greeks? Zeus. Yeah, Zeus was the god of pigs. It's kind of interesting from our viewpoint, but it's a pig god. No, he's a god of pigs. So Zeus, to placate Zeus, when you killed a pig, then you offered it. Now, that is animism. Okay, in pantheonic paganism, this is where basically Socrates was sitting and writing his Phaedo, because in pantheonic paganism, we know a little bit about how that works. So, I have my temple. Here's my Greek temple, right? And here's the altar. And so I sacrifice the animal, on the altar outside, and I cook it up. And then I bring it to the god, right? And I place it before the god. Do you think anyone, the priests or the people or anyone, actually believed that the god was going to eat any of it?
No.
What was the point of the offering?
Yeah, the pleasing aroma and the willingness to offer it.
The pleasing aroma, the willingness to offer it to the gods. The willingness to offer it to the gods. But, just like the animists, am I really offering it for the expectation of what? Kinda, right? Kinda. And remember what we have. This comes directly from what we've been talking about. I have Thusa, I think that's correct, Thusia, and I have Doron. Okay? So Thusia is when I sacrifice, for example, an animal that is brought as feed for the, as food for the gods, but a Doron is a sacrificial gift that is given. Now, we quite rightly would say there is an expectation from the gods for favor and more, right? Because you are pleasing the gods. And that's not incorrect. However, I go back to Phaedo. In Phaedo, Socrates argues very distinctly and succinctly, what I believe is becoming the Mysterion view, that the gods don't have a need for anything and cannot be placated or bribed. You can't be bribed, because that's not the point of the gods within the context of this. Now, in thinking about this, let's transition to the Hebraic worldview. In the Hebraic worldview, what am I doing with the sacrifice? I got the 5. I got the ascension sacrifice. I have the guilt sacrifice, or the sin. Let's say sin first, then guilt, then priest, and then the thanksgiving sacrifice, right? So, what am I doing with these sacrifices? The ascension sacrifice just acknowledges the existence of God. That's interesting. Do the Greeks have anything like that? A little bit. That's animism, right? In animism, I am acknowledging there is God. There is a God, right? In whatever I'm placating, because I'm taking the fruit from the God. I'm thanking them, right? So the ascension sacrifice kind of has some antecedents in animism. What about the sinner guilt sacrifice? Is there any evidence of that? Anywhere here? It's very interesting, isn't it?
If you felt like you wronged the gods in some way, you might bring a sacrifice or gift to try to make up for it.
Have you ever read anything like that in Greek thought? Or even Latin thought? Before, prior to Christianity? The idea that you may have wronged the gods and therefore could placate them? In the Greek myths, if you wronged the gods, what was your fate?
Not good.
Right? There's really nothing you could do. As a matter of fact, I don't remember if there's a myth where...
Didn't they give them tasks to do sometimes, or, you know?
Yeah, they did. They gave them tasks to do. What I want to point out is there's an assumption with sinner guilt that you're not right with God, with the gods, right? Is there any assumption like that here? No. The assumption that, yeah, you're fated, that's a big deal, is the idea of fate, that I am fated. But here, there's an assumption that I'm not right. Here, there may be a problem with the gods, right? But here, there's a problem with me, with humanity. Yeah, I think this is very interesting. And then the priestly sacrifice, I mean, we could probably drag something out of that. But here's an interesting one. In the Thanksgiving sacrifice, remember what I told you? I'm not thanking God for what has been. I am celebrating with God what will be, right? Because they give the sacrifice of the first fruits. And it's the 10% of the first fruits. It is not a sacrifice that gives back to God based on what He gave you per se. It's rather, and it's not a. Well, I put the wrong way. It is thanking God for what He has done and is doing, as opposed to I'm giving to God with expectation, right? Which is very interesting because that's the fatal argument. Now, when was this set up? This is Old Testament. This is 1500. Today it would be 3,500 years ago, right? This is way old. This is way old. This is Mosaic Covenant stuff. Here, the pantheonic paganism, let's say about 1000 AD, or BC, 1000 BC, and Mysterion is about 500 BC at the earliest. So what I want to point out is, as we look at the viewpoint of the Hebrews especially, when we keep in mind, number one, these people are sophisticated. They understand what is going on. They understand about the sacrifice. Also, the fact that sacrifice appears to be wired. It's hardwired into man's thinking. And by the way, I want to point out this. The hardwired into man's thinking in animism is you are treating the gods just like you would treat what? Let's say you own the apple tree, and I go and take an apple from it. What's the expectation?
You need to pay for it.
Yeah. I think this is very interesting because animism, obviously, the concept of sacrifice in animism points to, need I say, a trade and economy. And it isn't interesting, I'll even go further. Isn't it interesting? I've told you before, 40 days and 40 nights, with 2 people I can count to 40 because I got 40 digits. That was a keynote in almost every, society from an economic standpoint, but also obviously from a religious standpoint too, from a sacrificial standpoint. And beyond that, remember I told you Zoroastrianism, why do we have base 60? Because when you add a priest, you get another 20 digits. And I can add 60 base 60 instead of 40, right? So I can count. So I think it's very interesting, and when we study this, the way we generally look at this is we look at it as if these are unsophisticated people, they don't understand things. But I would point out to you that I don't think they're any less sophisticated than we are. It's just they understand the world a little differently than we do, right? Because if you know, kid, and believe that the dryad that was in your apple tree had some degree of power or was a god, wouldn't you do a libation to it? Right? Just like if you went to your neighbor's yard and stole an apple from his tree and he was mad at you, wouldn't you pay him a nickel or a dime or whatever, 50 cents, whatever an apple costs today? Just saying. I don't see any difference. I see a very sophisticated viewpoint. And if it's hardwired into people, what does that mean about us? These views are hardwired into us. They are part of our fundamental understanding of the world. And by the way, I was thinking, the reason I brought this up, I thought it was very important to bring this up to you, is because the number one question someone might ask about Hebrews is this pertinent today? I think it is. I think Hebrews is very pertinent today. I think the arguments and the discussion in the Hebrews, the logical argument, is very important because it answers the question, is Jesus pertinent to us? Is Christ pertinent to us? But if you take the viewpoint that sacrifice is, what, unsophisticated, just a mechanism, a made-up mechanism of man, it means nothing, right? It has no context. But if you take the viewpoint, which I think is obvious, there's an obvious viewpoint, that sacrifice is something that is indelible within the human mind or structure. Now here's the words of the day. I thought these were very interesting words because, number one, this is a very strong, this is Lutrosin, lutrosis is the word it comes from. It means to loosen. Literally it means to ransom. To pay a ransom, and in the King James it's translated as redeemed or redemption. The reason I thought it was interesting is because this word means to redeem through to pay a ransom. So, to us, we understand what a ransom is. It's mostly a criminal activity. In the ancient world, it wasn't a criminal activity. What was it an activity of? What kind of trade? Because your Spartan neighbor in war, okay, your Spartan neighbor right across the border, you guys go to war with Athens, right? And not everybody gets killed. Some of you guys run away and they capture you, and now they do what? They ransom you back. And if you can't be ransomed, you become a slave, right? That's the way it worked in the ancient world, or they croat you. So basically, this was not an uncommon thing. We would say that a ransom today, well, of course, because based in our criminal justice system, a ransom is a criminal type occupation. In the ancient world, it wasn't. And if you remember the chivalric age, right, when knights did their nightly thing, and if you vanquished the knight, they would ransom their armor and their weapons, because otherwise you would claim them. You didn't claim the person, you would claim their armor and weapons. That's from the chivalric era. I think it's important to note, again, it's looking at the world historically rather than looking at it with the blinders that we have within our culture, and I think that's important. This word, A-I-O-N-A-I-N, Aeon-A-N, Aeon-A-N is Aeon-Eos is the basis of this word. I got that for you there. The reason this is interesting is because almost all the time, when they talk about the age, they talk about an aeon. Aeon, right? An age. This literally in the Greek means age of ages. Ages. In the Greek, this is the way you say forever. Eternity. The Greeks did not have a word for eternity other than this word. And this word means ages of ages. In other words, there's lots of ages. Now what makes this unique is almost all the time in the New Testament, what word do we get? The age. We don't, but what does our translators usually translate it as? Forever, now, right? The expectation they give us, because I think it's really funny. Because remember, what did John the Baptist and Jesus both preach, according to Mark, and I believe Matthew too? May have been so. The kingdom of heaven is here. It is the age of the kingdom of heaven. And it's not that it's here, it's close by, it's near. Literally the word is, it is so close that you can't tell the difference, right? What's interesting is the word is always used is the age. The age of that time is here. But they don't use the word forever very often. So I thought it was interesting to find it in Hebrews. And so let's look within the context and see where it is. Let's ease into this a little bit. Okay. I'll go back to 9. I'm not going to redo 9 or anything like that, but I've been off for a couple of weeks, so let's try to ease into this. They're talking about the sacrifices. They're talking about Thusa and Duran. Thusa being a sacrifice as in the animal sacrifice, and then a Duran as a sacrificial gift. One is a shared gift, right, and the other one is a gift given to the gods for a specific reason. And so in 9 it says, here's the NIV, this is an illustration for the present time indicating that the gifts and sacrifice being offered were not able to clear the conscience of the worshiper. And here's the direct translation. Which some parable to the occasion then placed at hand, down which were bore towards both sacrificial gifts and animal sacrifices, to be able not to complete the to minister down co-perception. Okay, literally this means the sacrificial gifts and animal sacrifices were a parable to the occasion, whose ministry could not reconcile the bearer for their sins. They could not reconcile the bearer for their sins. We know that because these sacrifices were only good for unintentional sin. Unintentional. This is the problem. So as we go into this, the author, although it gets occluded in the translation, in the Greek it is obvious. The author is telling us that, and they knew this too. Remember when Paul in the Acts gives he gives a sermon to the Jews and he gives a sermon to the Greeks. And his sermon to the Jews, the first thing he says, you know, there is no atoning, there is no sacrifice for the sins that you were involved in because of the diaspora. And remember I told you, I told you 36 things, including the Big Ten, that automatically say you cannot be atoned, you cannot receive sacrificial unction for those reasons, those things. You know, one of them not being at the three. There's six festivals in the Hebraic worldview. There are three of them are pilgrim festivals. In the pilgrim festivals, you have to be where? Jerusalem during the festival. If you're not there, that is an unforgivable sin. If you are at Yom Kippur and you don't hear the shofar, that's an unforgivable sin. There are all kinds of mitzvahs that are unforgivables. 36, to be most precise, if you look at the Jewish handbook of the Jewish people. So they knew this. And I think it's critical that we understand this, because we've been led along for years believing that, okay, the sacrificial system, right, is... But yet Hebrews tells us it didn't work. It was a parable. In 10 it says, they are only a matter of food and drink and various ceremonial washings, external regulations applying until the time of the new order. In 10, this literal translation, merely over food and kosher laws and beverages and varying or surpassing baptisms or mikvah, and fleshly equivocable deeds rested upon as far as an occasion to straighten thoroughly. Literally points to the kosher laws and the mikvah and the laws as a means to provide reconciliation. That was the means to provide reconciliation, although it would not expunge the sin. And of course, we know all sin is intentional, right? I mean, I hope you understand that. There is no such thing as unintentional sin, right? That would be kind of, I don't know. Anyway, here's 11. So we're at 11. Here's the NIV. When Christ came as high priest of the good things that are already here, he went through the greater and more perfect tabernacle that is not man-made, that is not a part of this creation. Christ being come, paragenomai. I almost gave you this word of the day. It's to become near. Paragenomai, to become near. And high priest, and by the way, let me point this out. But Christ to become near. What does that remind you of? The kingdom of heaven is here. Basically, it's so close, right? So Christ, again, remember in the beginning of Hebrews, the author proved in the Logos to tell us that Christ was God, right? So because Christ was here, it meant the kingdom of God was here, right? Not coming, not in the future, but here, right now. And this is the thing. But Christ, paragenomai, to become near, literally to be here. A high priest of, and it's ho, the good things, agathos, to come, genomai, to cause to be, dia, through a greater mesion, a larger and more perfect, not more perfect, a teleos, a complete skine, tent, tabernacle, not ever made with chiropolis, not ever manufactured or handmade. That, literally toto, that thing is, and it's imi. It's imi. Remember ego imi? Imi it's a direct verb of being. To say is added, not ever, ho, tauta, towards this, not building, this katesis, this original formation. Here's the direct translation. But Christ came near a high priest of good, caused to be through the larger and complete tabernacle, not ever made by hands. That thing is not ever towards this original formation. In other words, okay, here's our picture. I guess I should erase this. Here's God, and here's the plenum of everything, and here is the cosmos. The cosmos was created by the katesis. And in the katesis, in the cosmos, created by the katesis, put it like this, we have, this is philosophia, and here is gay. So, gay is what we perceive, Philosophia is all that man can know. And then outside is the cosmos, that which man cannot conceive of or know, because they're not God, right? But it was created by the catesis. So the tabernacle we're talking about was not created in the catesis. Where does it exist? This is very interesting. The author is telling us that the tabernacle of God is not part of the creation of God. What does that mean the tabernacle of God is?
Heaven, which is undefined.
Everything, right? I think this is very interesting because the tabernacle of God, remember at the beginning of Hebrews, the whole argument, Logos that tell us, was where do we want to be? What tabernacle do we want to be in? God's tabernacle, right? And God would invite us into his tabernacle. Well, what is God's tabernacle? It's not just the cosmos. It was outside, it was not created in the original formation, the catesis. Therefore, it is being with the being of God. I think this is very sophisticated. This is beyond the normal sophistication we see. The original, our normal view is, right? God creates the cosmos, and of course the cosmos includes the heavens and the earth, right? And all that good stuff. And so therefore, when we die or our eternal spirits go to reside with God within the cosmos, right? That's not what it's saying. It's saying that God and Jesus, the tabernacle of God, is not just the cosmos. What that means is that puts us on a sphere. Remember when God says we are inheritors? We are, what's the word? We've been adopted, right? Adopted like, we're like Christ. Adopted like Christ. In other words, in God, we, as non-Arians, right, we believe that there's God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. Right? They're all the same God. C.S. Lewis says they are the three ways we see God, a four-dimensional being in a three-dimensional world, which is really cool. But it's all the same God. But within that, they are within the tabernacle that this writer is writing about right now. So therefore, it isn't that you're part of God's tabernacle in the heavens, in the cosmos. You're rather part of God's tabernacle with the Godhead itself. This is very interesting. There's no separation, right? I don't know. I don't know if you find this as interesting as I do. This is an absolute statement that the tabernacle and the heavenly tabernacle not only are not made by God, but it wasn't even made by man, or it wasn't made by man, that it is an essence of God, that it's part of God's being, and that you and I and all of us within that Christian sphere, according to the writer of Hebrews, is part of that. So let's go to 12. In the NIV, he did not enter by means of the blood of goats and calves, but he entered the most holy place once and for all by his own blood, having obtained eternal redemption. Neither, Oda, not however, dia through, thee is added, the blood, the hamia, of goats, tragos, he-goats, and calves, ismochos, young bullocks. But they, dia through his own, his idios, his own blood, hamia, he entered, ershomai, he entered in, once, and it literally is ephapax, upon one occasion, into the holy place, the Hagion, having obtained, literally herisko, to find aeonios, for the ages, eternal lustrosis, ransom. So, literally, Christ provided the ransom for us. The ransom being, and you know, that we, if you remember, there are all kinds of illustrations. I don't know if, I think it's in Hebrews even, where it talks about the captives in the train. We are captives in the train. We are captives of sin. We are captives of Satan. I won't add that into this, but the point being that as Jesus told the people, you are slaves to sin. Remember, they said, we're not slaves to anyone. They said, you're slaves to sin. Well, he knew they were slaves to sin. Remember what this author just told us in 9 and 10 and 11? The sacrifices did not work. They were parables. They could not reconcile. They might make you feel better about the world, but they didn't make God feel better about you. Right? And so now, Christ, it says, and here's the translation, direct translation. Not, however, through blood of he-goats and young bullocks, but through his own blood, he entered into, upon one occasion only, into the holy place to find for this age a ransoming. To find for this age. And this age is probably, I should have said, for all the ages. For all the ages a ransoming. Because that's what this word means in Greek. All the ages. And again, I want to point out, we do not see this word used that often in the New Testament. This is a special word that means all the ages. And the Greeks didn't use it very often. Well, you can see why the Greeks didn't use it very often. I mean, the Greeks had their ages, right? The ages of what? The Titans. Remember? There was the age of chaos before the Titans. And then there were suddenly the Titans. Now, where did they come from? I don't know. But then the Titans had their great war, right? And during the Great War, and then there was Zeus was born, right? And Zeus killed the Titans. And Athena came fully armed from the mind of Zeus. And then you had the pantheonic paganism, right? There are the ages of the Greek ages. This writer is telling us this is for all ages. Let's go on to 13. All my notes. 13. This is the NIV. The blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer sprinkled on those who are ceremonially unclean sanctify them so that they are outwardly clean. Do I need to remind you? When we are talking, let's see what it says in the Greek, because it isn't quite as clear in the Greek that it's talking about this. But whenever I'm talking about cleanliness, what am I referring to? Am I talking about the sacrifices? Nope. I'm not talking about the sacrifices. Cleanliness refers to the ability to do two things. Number one, you can be unclean and go into the temple grounds. Here, let me draw a picture. I guess I should draw a picture. Here's the picture. So, I have the temple grounds, the mezzocline around it. And then I have this is the Holy of Holies, and this is the holy place, HB. And here's the altar. And I don't remember exactly where it is, but I'll draw it like this. There is the great sea. Remember the sea? We sing about it even. Here's the sea. What did you do in the sea? That's okay. We can handle it. So, when you went into the temple grounds, there was an assumption that you had accomplished the mikvah, right? Mikvah. So you did the mikvah bath. So you had gone to a mikvah within the prescribed means, right? If you're a woman, you did it after your menstruation had ended. If you're a man, you did it within a certain, you did it after you had sex, la la la. They had a whole list of things you had to do. But you had to go in the mikvah bath. And in the mikvah bath, I won't go over all the regulations for that, but there were huge regulations. The point is, you were completely immersed in the mikvah bath. So this is an assumption that you had gone through the mikvah bath. I don't think they required them to show like a certificate of mikvah whatever. But they might have known, because remember, these people did not wash, right?
You would smell really good.
Yeah, you probably didn't smell it, and your clothing probably retained your scents, because I don't know if they washed their clothing very often either, but anyway. The mikveh bath is an assumption, so you went in, and what is the first thing you did when you went into the temple grounds? I need to teach my Torah class again, right? The first thing you did is you washed your hands and your face and your feet. Hands, face, feet.
Things that weren't covered.
Things that were not covered. Precisely. Precisely. What is really interesting about this is we have a C also. What is our C?
Baptismal pool?
Yeah, if we were Orthodox, we'd have a no kidding C, because the Orthodox, like the Baptists, have a actual baptism. And you know what? They get bar naked even when they're adults and are baptized in the sea. The babies are naked. They baptize them, they immerse the babies. People are immersed because it's baptismos, which means to immerse, by the way. Just wanted to tell you. So in the mikvah, just like the sea in the Christian churches were seas. Now, you weren't baptized again. What do you do when you go into a church that has a sea or a baptismal font at the side of the door? It's almost always by the left side of the door.
You touch it and you do the sign of the cross usually.
You touch it, you do the sign of the cross. You don't fully wash yourself, but this is an image of the purification, right? It's an image of your baptism. It's the image of the mikvah. I mean, this stuff is really deep. The parallels, these are the parallels. And our Hebraic authors are reminding us of these parallels. So anyway, the point is that the thing, when you went in, you had to wash your hands and feet, right? You did it not because you were eating, but because you're going to the presence of God and you were reminding yourself, just like we remind ourselves of our baptismal vows. They did the same thing. It was a requirement, though, when you went into the temple, that that's what you did. The assumption, though, was that you were clean. In other words, you'd gone through the mikvah ritual, and that you had not eaten anything that was unkosher, right? That allowed you, if you were clean, you could then eat teruma. Teruma was a Thanksgiving sacrifice. All these other sacrifices are not shared sacrifices, except the priest sacrifice. The priest had to be clean to eat his. This was teruma for the priest, but other people could not eat this. But the teruma, the Thanksgiving sacrifice, you had to be, clean to be able to eat that. So when we talk about cleanliness, uncleanness, that's what it accounts to. Now let's see what the Greek says, because the Greek will really tell us what this is talking about. For, gar, signing a reason, if I, the blood, hamia, of taros, of bullocks, and goats, tregos, he-goats, and the is added. It's spodos, the, spodos. How come I didn't put translation for spodos in there? Spodos means ashes. It's a certain derivation, so it's an interesting word. The spodos, the ashes of a damalis, a heifer, sprinkling, riatizo, to render besprinkle, literally, the unclean, the koinio. Okay, this is where we get this. This isn't exactly what it's not exactly saying unclean. Koinuo. Okay, what's koinuo mean? Common. Yeah. I don't know if it's on it's probably my notes, but anyway, common. That's right. Koinuo means common. And by the way, what is koinuo? Koinuo Greek is koinia Greek, is what we say. Common Greek from the period, right? The universal Greek from the period. Does that mean unclean? If I were a Greek writer and I meant unclean, do you think I would use the word koinuo? No. This isn't what, I don't think it's talking about. Anyway, we'll get into this a little bit. Sanctify. Hagizeo, to make holy. Forward to, forward to the purifying. It's not purifying. It's katharotes. 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 Okay. Can anybody give me what the base of this word is in English? Katharotes. Catharsis. Yes. This is one of my favorite words just about of the whole English-Greek thing. There are other words I like that are pure Greek, but this is one of my favorite shared words because catharsis, I had a professor in English in high school, and I don't know if he's still alive, he's probably gone, long gone. Mr. Martin was a fantastic guy. He introduced me to Plato, into the Greek scholars, into the Greek stuff, but one of his biggest things was, if you look at Aristotle, and the way he writes about creativity and about fiction, he writes about, there's a Aristotelian treatise on tragedy. And it's very famous. And if you haven't read it, you ought to, even though you probably gag reading it because it's, you know, one of those old Greek documents, right? But it's really interesting because in it, he says that creativity is a catharsis. In Greek, a catharsis can mean a lot of things. I mean, to us, a catharsis usually means a purging, like you're barfing, right? Vomiting.
Can't hold it in.
Can't hold it in. In Aristotle and the Greek worldview, a catharsis is a cathartic of anything. So, yeah, it can be you're being sick. There's another word for that, actually. But you can be being sick. You can be mentally creative, right, and writing. Or suddenly burst out into song, like a musical, right? Suddenly, Julie Andrews bursts out into song, and you go, oh, what? And they dance on the top of the stuff. That's a catharsis. The Greeks would say, that's cathartic, that's a catharsis. But did you have a...
I was just thinking, isn't it like an experience that changes you for the better, regardless of what it is? You can come out on the other side of it as improved, in an improved state.
I will go with that, but I would say the Greeks would say that catharsis, multiple catharsi, are more common in the Greek worldview. Because the Greeks would say, if I go to a party and have a great time, that's a catharsis, right? I have an emotional catharsis. If I go home and I make love to my wife, that's a catharsis. It's a type of catharsis, right? If I have a creative idea and I write it down, that's a catharsis. And so Aristotle was trying to tie physical catharsis to mental catharsis. That's one of his great additives to literature or to thinking, right? Because all of us want to have, well, I hope all of us want to have creative ideas and thoughts, right? You do. But Aristotle would say you have to develop yourself into a mental catharsis. And so the point I want to make here is, okay, this word does not have anything to do with cleanliness. Now, I will mention this. The sprinkling of the rendered heifer, what was that? What was the sprinkling of the rendered heifer? Anybody remember from the Old Testament Torah?
The ashes, it's a purification.
For what? For what purpose?
Water through the ashes, and it makes the water pure.
Yeah, but for who? No, what water pure? Who was it for? It's a big deal. The red heifer. Anybody remember that? Okay, I didn't read... I think I'll get this all right because I taught this before in the Torah class. This is a big deal. Every I think it's Jubilee. I believe it's every Jubilee. They would have to get, I think it's every 50 years, they would find the red heifer. Apparently, a DNA red heifer was almost impossible to find. That is a pure red heifer with no spot that was not red. So they would take a pure red heifer and they would incinerate it and make it into ashes. And that 50 years of red heifer would have to do for the high priest. They would keep using the ashes because that was the way that you purified the high priest for specifically the high ritual of going into the Holy of Holies. So in the purification of the high priest, to go into the Holy of Holies every year, you had to sprinkle on them this ashes from the red heifer. And even today, this is a huge deal because the high priest, to have a high priest, you have to have what? You can't just say I'm high priest. You got to have what? You got to have a red heifer. Yeah, and you got to have ashes from red heifer prepared the proper way.
So
And the
this
pro-
is ashes and sackcloth?
What's that?
Ashes and sackcloth?
No, it's not ashes and sackcloth. It's nothing to do with ashes and sackcloth. This has to do
That's what I'm making
with
sure.
purification for the high priest, to be the high priest for the people. And the big deal is, and I read an article about this, the problem is they are trying to find a red heifer, right? The Jewish people are trying to find a red heifer, and they can't do it because they say the DNA strains, it's impossible to find a red heifer of the proper type. Which means there can never be another high priest. Now, you know, the rest of the world sloughs this off and says, oh, this isn't a big deal, right? It's kind of like when Herod, you know, Herod destroyed the records, and so therefore we can't tell who could be.
No genealogy.
Yeah, no genealogy, so how do you know who could be king,
Anybody
right?
you want.
Or high priest, right? So, you know, this is a huge problem. And I believe, okay, I'll put my foot in the theological pool. But if God is God, what is he doing? He is making it impossible to do the things which are the parable of the real, right? Because we already have a high priest. This is what Hebrews tells us. This is why Hebrews is pertinent. Hebrews tells us there's already a high priest. He says who it is. And now he's talking about the heifer, right? I mean, how pertinent could this be? Now, you go look it up yourself. I think there's some articles about it. But I think it's really interesting. If there could never, ever be a red heifer of the proper type, you can never have a high priest. And why is this a big deal for the Jews, Jewish people?
They'd never bring back their system even if they were able to get the temple and the mount back and make the temple again.
That is precisely correct. No matter what you do, you can never go back to the temple worship. And in Hebrews tells us it was a parable anyway. And we know it doesn't reconcile you, right? You almost think that they know this, right? Within a very deep standpoint and understand this. Because how hard are they trying to rebuild the temple?
Talked about it for thousands of years.
Well, they haven't, yeah. They've been trying for thousands of years, but they haven't done it. You know, it's not just, look, I guarantee you that if the Jewish people wanted to build a temple tomorrow, would they do it? Yeah. You know, kick the Muslims to the curb, which is, you know, kind of a false and demonic, you know, religion anyway, that, you know, really preys on children and people. But okay, however you want to do it, I don't care. It's like, they just do it, right? Yes, sir.
It's like in today's readings in church where their minds were open, they could understand the scriptures. I don't think the Jewish people ever had their minds open, so they really don't understand the true meaning of the scriptures either.
I don't disagree with that, but I'm going to put this in a different context, okay? I don't disagree with what you said, but let me tell you this. By the Acts, we know, did lots of Jews join Teen Hodos? Yes. Did lots of priests join Teen Hodos? Yes. So I would say that, you know, I would bet you, if you could open up the heavenly census, that you would find that 2/3 of all the Jewish people joined Teen Hodos. That's what became Christianity, as the Greeks called it, right? But a huge percentage of the Jews did, because their minds were open. They were ready for it. This whole thing, they were really bugged about this 36 stuff. You know, look, if you were, you could live your whole life as a Hebrew forever and ever until the Greeks came. What did the Greeks cause? What was the thing the Greeks did that caused you so much consternation?
Applied some logic.
Yeah, because now you got to live by logic. When, you know, the Hellenization of the world, and especially the Jews, now, guess what? If you got 36 forevers that keep you from God, and you're living in an illogical world, right, and unreasoning, and I'm not saying this negatively, because 90% of the people out there live in an unreasoned world. They have no clue what's going on. They don't even know they barely know how to tie their shoes, much less think their way out of a paper bag. But if you're living your life, and all of a sudden the Greeks came, and the Greeks go, hey, let's think about this logically. And they go, there's 36, not just the Big Ten. But if you do anything intentionally, there ain't nothing you can do about it. Just give it up, right? You're going to Gehenna. That's it. Toast. Nada. Gone. Well, then what do you got to do? You got to start rethinking the world. And isn't it funny that the Pharisees were bringing the Jewish worldview out to the world? And the Greeks loved it. The Greeks loved it. The Greeks who were pining for law, right? Can you see this? The Greeks are pining for law. They love law. They're into law because law is logical, right? And if you tell me that the law came from the gods, what did the Greek gods give them? What kind of laws did the Greek gods give them?
Graciousness.
Yeah, and fate. It's like, okay, you're fated. That's it. You're done, right? But what did the Hebrew gods say? Here's the laws. And guess what? To the Greeks, do you think they sounded logical to the Greeks? Don't murder. Don't commit adultery. Don't steal. Don't lie. The Greeks would say, stealing, taking a little bit from my neighbor, if I leave him a denarius and takes, a bushel of apples, that's okay. That's dikasune, right? Balance, right? Just don't get caught. Remember Priapus? Don't get caught. But the Greeks would say that, hey, this Jewish thing is cool. Except, you know what? We got a little problem. And this Jewish viewpoint too, because when you become aware of sin, what does Romans tell us? When you become aware of sin, well, I had kind of a one of those Facebook kind of things with a person who was basically a Planned Parenthood, obviously a person who killed babies in a Planned Parenthood thing. And just digging for, to reconcile themselves. 5 minutes early. Maybe my watch is off. To reconcile themselves to what I thought was absurd and horrific, right? But just trying to reconcile themselves, and they've got to know that this is horrific, right? It's kind of like criminals, right? They justify, I think the Catholic Church in the Psalms says that all men believe that what they do is right. Well, until what? Until the law, you hear the absolute law from God, and the law says, no, what you're doing is not right. And the Greeks were like that. The Greeks were very open to this idea because they wondered what is right and wrong. That's a huge concept that they were looking for. And guess what? Then Teen Hodos brought this idea. Right? So I guess I wanted to get further than this, but I thought we had another 4 minutes or so. No, that's the end. What's wrong with my watch?
We'll take it.
It's a GPS watch. Maybe it's sick. I don't know. Thank you, Father, for your word. I pray to look after us this week and help my watch or the GPS satellite constellation to get back in line. Thank you, Father. Amen. It could be the spheres or